If your understanding of priming enemies in Warframe is limited to just using your secondary weapon to apply a bunch of status effects onto a bunch of enemies, then you don't know everything that there is to know about priming enemies in Warframe, and that's what this video is being made to fix. Hey guys, what's up, it's iFlynn here, and in this video, we're going to be learning about all of the different methods of priming enemies in Warframe. I actually got the idea for this video from the comment section of my previous video called Why You Deal No Damage in Warframe. It had quite a provocative thumbnail where it literally said, your damage sucks, but a lot of people watched that video, and the key takeaway for me from the comments was a lot of you guys don't like actually using weapons or gear in this game to prime the enemies, which is basically building up a bunch of different elemental status effects to take advantage of mods such as Condition Overload. If I whip out my melee weapon here, you can see that it reads plus 80% melee damage per status type affecting the target. So the idea of priming enemies in the first place originated from this Condition Overload mod, and it's now referred to Condition Overload as a mechanic because it has made its way into things like our primary weapon. So if I go to the Exultra here, just as an example, then I go to the D polarity, you can see that we have Galvanized Aptitude here, and it basically does the exact same thing. So you see the second benefit of this mod is plus 40% direct damage per status type affecting the target for 20 seconds, stacking up to 2 times. We even have a similar mod on our secondary. So this is Galvanized Shot, and it reads the exact same as the primary, just a little bit different. So plus 40% direct damage per status type affecting the target for 14 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. Now, the other side of the coin here is we also have Conditional Arcane. So this one, in this example, is Cascadia Flare, and it reads on heat status effect. It doesn't have to be specifically from your secondary weapon. It just says plus 12% damage for 10 seconds, stacking up to 480% bonus damage. So just to demonstrate how Cascadia Flare works, I am playing Temple, and their first ability is really good at applying a bunch of heat status effects onto enemies. So I'm going to approach these enemies here, and you'll see top right hand corner, we apply all these heat status effects and we get the Cascadia Flare buff. Even though I've got my Exultra Prime equipped, it's just applying to my secondary weapon though, because of course that's what it is equipped on. But I'm just showing you guys so you can proc it without actually having to have heat modded onto your secondary weapon itself. So let's go back to the OG Condition Overload mod for a second. So it reads plus 80% melee damage per status type affecting the target. And now we go ahead and we take a look at Prime Pressure Point, and it reads plus 165% melee damage. So basically, all we need to do to out-damage the amount of damage that Pressure Point gives us is have 3 unique status effects applied to the enemy. So these unique status effects, they don't have to be elemental status effects. They could be, impact, slash, puncture. So, already just with this melee weapon alone, this is the Nami Solo, we've got 4 unique status effects on this weapon. On top of that, if you're using the Panzerfaust Pfeila as an example, it's going to be applying viral status effects to the enemies as well. So you're basically always going to have more damage running Condition Overload than you are running Prime Pressure Point. Now, there are going to be examples where Prime Pressure Point is better to slot in over Condition Overload simply because, you're using, like, let's say a glaive because of how the explosions and stuff work with those, or let's say you're fighting a boss that has damage attenuation and you're trying to do something very specific. But outside of those specific scenarios, Condition Overload is pretty much always better. The other cool thing about Condition Overload is that there's no real cap to, the amount of damage that you can get from it. So if you were to apply all of the 16 possible status effects in the game to a single enemy, and then you hit them with your melee weapon, you would be dealing a bonus 1,280% damage. So what ends up happening is YouTubers like myself, we end up just recommending the Epitaph Prime because this is pretty much the best priming weapon in the game. If we go ahead, we take a look at the build, you can see that I have 185% status chance with a bunch of different elements on. So I've got radiation, I have heat, I have viral. Now, viral is a preferred element to have on simply because of what it actually does as a status effect. So whenever you hit 10 stacks, it increases the damage that you actually deal directly to the enemy's health. So if you're always able to cap out at 10 stacks of viral, you're just dealing more overall damage. Of course, we have our Panzer helping out with that. But in the event that you're not actually using the Panzer, having viral modded onto your priming secondary weapon is pretty important. So you guys can see with my epitaph alone, I'm able to apply a bunch of different status effects. We have the IPS, so the impact, the puncture, the slash. We have heat. We have cooled, which is kind of like the passive from the epitaph. I've got blast in there, radiation, and viral, which means I'm getting a lot of bonus damage on my melee weapon whenever I just swing it because I've got condition overload equipped. But the really cool thing that barely anyone talks about is that there are other sources of priming enemies in this game. You don't actually have to use your secondary weapon, right? Because it's kind of unfortunate that the epitaph prime takes up an entire weapon slot. So what have I told you? We could instead, use our companion like the Riga, for example, with a build that looks a little bit like this. You can just go ahead and copy this. And then, of course, on the burst laser prime that I've got equipped to it, we use a build that looks like this. Now, what's going to happen is I'm going to spawn in these enemies. I'm going to get kind of close to them. Now, watch how many different status effects my Riga applies to all of the enemies, right? Now, it's not applying all the status effects as fast as, let's say, my epitaph prime. But remember how the condition overload mod actually reads. It's per unique status effect applied to the enemy. So we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different status effects currently applied to this enemy standing in front of me. So before I even swing my Nami solo, I know that I'm going to be dealing a bonus 640% melee damage to the enemy that has all of those different status effects applied to them. Now, everything that we just talked about totally neglects the fact that sometimes our Warframes can even apply elements to the enemies as well. So I'm using Varuna here, which is probably a pretty extreme example. But if I cast my second ability, you can see that I just apply a bunch of different status effects. I can go ahead, tap it again, and there's even more. So condition overload is going to work very well with Varuna. Kome is another example. I go ahead, I press my fourth ability. You can see a bunch of different status effects were just applied to all the enemies. I've also got Nourish subsumed over her 1. So if I press my 1 here, if I shoot the bad guys, you can see that I just apply viral status effects to them. There are even some weapons that exist in the game where you can justify using one of these condition overload mods. So I'm using the Kuvan Yukor here with Galvanized Shot. And because it already deals a bunch of different status effects, then you're getting a lot of bonus damage from this mod. So just to demonstrate, this is the Kuvan Yukor with Enervate on. So that's going to apply even more status effects. But that's just going to increase our damage. And you can see how damaging the Kuvan Yukor is with that build that I just showed you guys. Like, as we apply more of those status effects, we're dealing even more damage, and this is without any Warframe buffs. So what we're going to do now is we're going to run a little test. This is the AX-52. It's just a standard assault rifle that you can get from Hulvania once you level up with the Hex Syndicate. And what I'm rocking on this is a very standard corrosive and heat build. Now, the reason that I chose corrosive and heat is simply because these are just the two elements that I'm going to be recommending to players moving forward, because heat has kind of turned into the new bleed proc of Warframe, if you think about it. Like, it is doing what Hunter Munitions used to do, just in a better way, because it's elemental damage and it's just adding to the weapon. So this is our non-primer build, where we are using Primary Merciless plus Serration, which is already kind of an over-investment in terms of like base damage. Like, using both of these together is kind of like, what are you doing? But yeah, this is our non-primer build. And all we're going to do is we're going to go ahead, we're going to shoot at these corrupted heavy gunners, preferably in the head. And you can see the amount of damage that we deal. So it's respectable. Don't get me wrong. It's not bad at all. And as we get more and more kills, we're building up our Primary Merciless, but we're not really killing fast enough versus these heavier enemies to build up our Primary Merciless to the 12 stacks that it needs. So instead, what I've done is I've spawned in 12 of the Lancers and 8 of the Heavy Gunners. So I'm going to get my 12 kills versus these guys first, because they're a lot easier to take down, just to give this as fair of a shot as we possibly can. So there were 10 stacks, 11 and 12. Now we're shooting at the head of the heavy gunner, and we are dealing some pretty good damage. Like, they're dying pretty quickly. The problem is just keeping it up, you know what I mean? Like, you have to constantly be killing. Like, we're not one-shotting these guys. I'm kind of keeping it up right now. We're able to keep it up for the 8 kills, but yeah, like it's definitely okay damage. Now we're simply just going to swap Serration with Galvanized Aptitude, and I'm also going to go ahead and throw on the Doriga. Now this comparison, it's a little bit unfair because the Doriga is going to be applying additional elements such as Viral, such as Magnetic, Corrosive, etc. And all of those do different things, which is going to help out our damage. But that is also within the benefit of priming. So even if I were to, let's say, use that previous build where we were using Serration and I also used the Doriga, I would be seeing substantially more damage, right? So you should kind of be priming the enemies with as many different elements as possible anyway to make the most out of your damage, regardless of if you're using Serration or Galvanized Aptitude for your damage. So I'm going to go ahead, let my Doriga prime. Now we're aiming at the head, and straight away, you already notice the substantial damage increase. We went back to all of the heavy gunners here. Now, like I said, it's maybe not a super fair comparison because the previous build didn't get the benefits from like the Viral procs and stuff like that, but it was just going to be a wash either way, if I'm being 110% honest, because, you know, running the mod that helps out gives you bonus damage the more elements are applied to the enemy. Like, it's just that big of a boost. For the sake of being thorough and including all the testing in the video, let's go ahead, swap back to just Serration, and we'll use the Doriga as well. Now, in the previous little clip, we were dealing around 100,000, 120,000 damage with all of our Merciless stacks built up and the enemies being primed. So let's go ahead, prime them. Let's shoot at their head. Still doing okay. Don't get me wrong. The challenge is going to be keeping the Merciless stacks up. You can kind of feel that we're doing less damage. So 44,000, 65. That was some red crits there. Didn't really get any red crits in the last clip, but 150k and the red crit, 172, 77, 94, 61, 44. You know, so it's close, but it's definitely not, you know, the exact same. So, conclusion. Always be priming. That's it. That's the video. Thank you guys for watching. If you liked it, like it. If you want to see more Warframe content from me, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.